Stalin is dead. The power structure he created remains. The struggle for control of it has begun. At first, it seems to fall into the hands of his heir apparent, Georgy Malyankov. But within a week, Malyankov loses his job as party secretary. He is replaced by a party functionary almost unknown in the West, one N.S. Khrushchev. A precarious balance of power continues among three of the men who carried Stalin to his tomb. Malyankov, he was the closest to Stalin at the end. Molotov, he is the last of the old revolutionary leaders. Beria, his secret police are Stalin's old weapon of terror and power. The balance cannot last. It does not. In the first hours after Stalin's death, Beria makes his bid. He holds a strong hand. He commands a private army, 2 million men with tanks and planes. He is the most powerful man in the Soviet Union. He is also the most hated, the most feared. He can seize power. He probably cannot hold it. For that, he needs support he does not now have. His record as the man who carried out Stalin's bloody purges has left him without allies. He makes a move to change that.
Long live our mighty homeland, indomitable bulwark of liberty and peace. Long live the party of Lenin and Stalin.
The Presidium held a meeting to decide future policy. They went down the line, each man giving his opinion, and most agreed as they went along that the Stalin reign of terror would have to end. Beria was the last on the list to speak. He described the general situation in the Soviet Union as he saw it from the point of view of the police chief. He claimed that the country was full of enemies, traitors, and spies, and that a purge was necessary. But he agreed that the people were so nervous and distressed and disturbed that he proposed a 6-month period of relaxation first on both the home and foreign fronts.
He tried to endear himself to various groups in the Soviet society and to various groups in the party so that they will support his bid for power. The first indication of his liberal tactics came at Stalin's funeral, when in his speech was one of the 3 speakers, Stalin's funeral, he said that the Soviet people can sleep peacefully, that they don't have to worry any moves from the Soviet police that will be similar to that of the Stalin era. And this was really the beginning of his attempt to create a different image of Beria that existed before, a more liberal image.
The Russian people feel the effect of this move. More food appears in the shops. There are more things to buy. Prices are reduced. No one outside the Kremlin knows the reason yet. They only know the atmosphere has changed. Fear of a purge no longer hangs over them. People have come home from the prison camps. The terrible tensions they have lived under for so many years are suddenly relaxed. In April, Beria makes his next move. He goes on an inspection tour. Everywhere he goes, supporters of Malyankov and Molotov are purged. Key jobs go to supporters of Beria in Georgia, in the Ukraine, in the Baltic provinces. Back in the Kremlin, the power and intentions of Lavrenti Beria are clearly visible.
Beria commanded the 24 NKV divisions in the Soviet Union, of which 4 were always on duty in Moscow as the garrison. He commanded the guard of the Kremlin. He alone of all the members of the Presidium were allowed to carry arms into the Kremlin. He commanded and controlled and named the drivers and the servants of the others. He tapped their telephone lines. The result was that for them to even talk together, they had to try to meet on street corners by apparent accident and whisper words to each other. In spite of the difficulties, they did manage to communicate to each other a general agreement. They all agreed that Beria had to go.
The facts, the meat of the whole case, was presented in a secret letter signed by the Soviet leadership, which was directed to the party officials in Soviet Russia. This letter was also sent to the leadership of the Polish party. As a staff member of the Polish Central Committee, I had access to this letter. Also in the letter was contained a description of the tactics that they use for fighting Beria. They said that they had to be very cautious. Although they knew about Beria's activities, they knew that he's trying to eliminate other members of the Presidium and to achieve a dictatorial power for himself. They were trying to convince him that they don't know about it. They were sitting with him together on the meetings of the Presidium, not accusing him of anything. They were concentrating their own powers, waiting for the proper moment.
As his enemies wait, fateful events begin in East Germany. Beria is responsible for the internal security of the Soviet Empire. On the surface, the East German regime looks strong and stable. Behind this facade, its economy is collapsing. Resistance is growing. As part of Beria's plan to relieve tension, to make his image more liberal, Soviet troops are pulled out. June 16th, East Berlin is in revolt. What begins as a protest against increased norms becomes a revolution against the communists. Beria's enemies in the Kremlin have been given the pretext they're looking for. June 17th, Soviet tanks arrive. In 2 days, they will put down the revolt. But Soviet prestige has suffered a damaging blow, and the hold of the Soviet Union on its satellites has been seriously weakened. Someone has miscalculated. Responsibility must be fixed for what is happening here. In the Kremlin, it is decided the man who is responsible is Lavrenti Beria. On June 26th, there is a performance of Swan Lake at the Bolshoi Theater. All of the leaders are present, except one. It seems to be a normal summer evening in Moscow. In the early hours of the morning of June 27th, Pravda's presses begin to roll.
The paper was out at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I sat down to look at it. There didn't seem to be anything very important. I looked down in the corner of page 1. There was one little note that struck my eye. The leaders of the Communist Party had been to the Bolshoi Theater that night, and it mentioned who was there. I ran through the list of the leadership. Everyone had been there but one man, Beria. I thought about that. This was a period of time when collective leadership was being emphasized. They all went together, attended the same parties. It seemed to me this was significant. I filed a story to the Times, not a social item, but a political item. It got through late on a Sunday morning. As it turned out, with a big Sunday paper, the Times didn't get it in print.
How did they get Beria? The facts are hidden behind the Kremlin walls. What follows is the jigsaw puzzle as we have pieced it together. This is Eugenio Reale. He was once a member of the Italian Communist Party. He tells this story as it was told to him by a fellow communist who has since died.
Secondo quanto mi riferì Celeste Negarville.
According to what my colleague Celeste Negarville reported to me when he returned from Moscow, Khrushchev spoke in the following manner about Beria's death to the delegation of the Italian Communist Party. Khrushchev said to them, "We knew right after Stalin's death that Beria was preparing a coup d'etat. For 2 weeks, we didn't sleep in our homes because we were afraid of being arrested. We felt secure only in our offices in the Kremlin, protected by our personal guards. We decided to get rid of Beria, so we made a series of phone calls, pretending we wanted to offer full power to Beria, and knowing all the time that our calls were being overheard by Beria's secret police. Then we sent Voroshilov to Beria to propose a meeting at which we would make Beria first secretary of the party and chairman of the Council of Ministers. This is the story Negarville told me that Khrushchev had told him and the others in the delegation."
Reale's story is denied by the two communists who were present with Negarville. Giancarlo Paietta, number 2 man in the Italian Communist Party, calls it sheer fantasy.
A proposito della narrazione della fine di Beria, è pura fantasia.
Senator Giacomo Pellegrini calls it a fantastic tale.
Con altrettanta fermezza che tutto ciò è parto di fantasiosi racconti.
Georges Brutel is Assistant Secretary General of the French Socialist Party. He and French Senator Pierre Comin heard a version of Beria's fall from Khrushchev himself.
Pierre Comin se trouvait assis juste en face.
Pierre Comin was sitting just across from Khrushchev. Khrushchev began to tell us about Beria's plot to take power, about how the other leaders had found out about this plot and how they had put Beria on the defensive. Khrushchev said to Pierre Comin, conscious of the effect of his words, "You see, Beria was sitting in the very chair in which you are sitting at this moment. Beria was sitting in this chair while we accused him and pointed out his faults and responsibilities. It was while he was sitting there, where you are sitting, that we unmasked him." Khrushchev then added that Beria was allowed to go out of the room. He was arrested in the antechamber and taken to the Lubyanka prison.
The most plausible account I heard of how it was actually done came from Khrushchev's own lips. Story which he himself told to a group of foreign communist delegates to the 22nd Communist Party Congress in Moscow and the Kremlin last October.
The story heard by Shapiro varies only in minor details from the one that came to NBC's Joseph C. Harsh.
Whether the story is history, of course, we can't possibly know. It was given to me from a source which I am sure gave me an accurate account of what Khrushchev had said. They had succeeded in getting out of Moscow the 4 NKVD divisions, which were always under Beria's command and in control of the city of Moscow. And they had arranged the meeting where the room where the presidium met, with a bell under the edge of the table in front of Malyenkov, who at that time was chairman, running into the next room where 4 army generals were placed. Beria was in the room, apparently not at all suspicious, until Khrushchev asked a question which tipped him off, at which point Beria reached for his gun, which he kept in his briefcase, he being the only member of the Central Committee who was allowed to come armed into the Kremlin. Khrushchev says that he'd already removed the gun from Beria's briefcase. Beria discovered the empty briefcase, went white, and started to do something, whatever one does when you realize what's up. At which point Malyenkov reached for the button, but his hand trembled, and according to Khrushchev, Malyenkov was incapable of pushing it, so Khrushchev reached over, pushed the button. The 4 generals came into the room. And in the version I heard, as Khrushchev tells the story, the Beria problem was solved then and there. And subsequently, they smuggled Beria's body out of the Kremlin through the NKVD guards. There still remained the 24 NKVD divisions all over Russia. Khrushchev said that this problem also was liquidated, but not without bloodshed.